2020, Paper 2, Section B. Let's get right on in with it. Trade development and issues in Africa. But let's get started with the 5-mark question. So, with reference to figure 1 and extract A, so we'll have a read of them, but let's read the question. It's an explain question. The likely impact of the Fairtrade scheme on agricultural community. Now, even without reading any of these extracts, you can probably pick up a few marks here. So, of course, what does Fairtrade schemes do? They give, essentially, they increase the income of farmers. Why? Since they get fairer prices. Things like, for example, cocoa beans are commodities as well. You've learnt this in the spec. It links a lot to things like buffer stocks, where they have, basically cocoa beans have lots of fluctuations. Therefore, things like fair trade schemes, as they have higher incomes, to help support them with things like fluctuations in the prices of cocoa beans. And of course, a lot of students do forget this, but fair trade is actually on the spec. It's something you're actually meant to learn about. 4.3.3 to be exact about the spec point. So of course, what is the overall impact of these fair trade schemes? Of course, most of if you know about fair trade premium, it's used to encourage farmers, these cocoa farmers, to invest back into their business, invest back into their firm, to allow them to grow in the future and have funds for development in the future. But now let's just add a few application points into that, and that will be more than enough for that 5-mark question. So where am I going to get the application from? Let's have a look at figure 1 first. So the fair trade scheme in cocoa industry, how the additional revenue is spent by cocoa farmers, and it gives us a nice little breakdown on improving business, farm equipment, etc. And let's have a read of extract A, which is talking about cheap cocoa is costing farmers dear. So extract A looks like it's giving us quite a few stats of farmers' incomes, and then talks about how if they weren't part of the fair trade scheme, of course, they would have lower incomes. Then in the second paragraph, it looks like it's mentioning mostly about the price volatility. Of course, cocoa being a commodity, therefore suffers a fair amount of price volatility, which of course puts strain onto the farmers themselves. Then of course it talks about how, yes, the farmers' incomes are being strained, but like the massive manufacturers like Cadbury, they're making massive profits from the processing of these cocoa beans. Okay, so I think I have more than enough here to answer this 5-mark question, so let's get started with it. So the way I'm going to answer this is firstly just like writing what I was saying earlier. So fair trade allows for higher incomes for these farmers, therefore if you think about the fluctuations, also helps protect against those fluctuations, as if they're getting paid more, it means that there's going to be less fluctuation in the price. Then of course going to add a bit more, I'm going to add application to pick up the application marks with regards to this, then just to end off with a little explanation of how it directly impacts the farm. Then just going to end off with an explanation saying they use this higher income to essentially invest into their business, back it up with a bit of extract, figure 1 as well, using that 44% I believe it was. Okay, so the first bit of application I'm going to use is, I've talked about how fair trade, as we learn in the spec, as we learn in when they're revising the content, helps protect these farmers against fluctuations. Why? As cocoa is of course a commodity. I'm just going to quote the extract here as it mentions it in the extract. Where did it say? Yeah. So cocoa farmers have to accept risks from price volatility. I'm going to quote that as my first bit of application. Now I'm just going to end up with my application. So this increased income basically allows them to invest into their business, and I'm going to quote this 44% from the figure 1. So yeah, just ended it off with a little application. So I actually used the second bit of application instead of the first bit. So there, 45% of it was invested into farming equipment, which of course is just investing it into the business. So this increased income allows farmers to invest more into their business. And if that's how to get 5 out of 5 marks there, just make sure, of course, with your 5-mark questions, with your section B, you need to make sure you include your application, make sure your point is clear, and 5-mark question, the main trap, don't waste too long on it.